Mitsubishi was founded in 1870 as a shipping company, taking over the Nagasaki shipyard in 1884 to start large-scale shipbuilding, and creating many related spin-off industries before moving into aircraft development around 1917, when they started building Japan's first production car. The Model A Mitsubishi was 151 inches long, on a 104-inch wheelbase and 2,900 pounds, with power coming from a 2.8-liter inline-4 producing 35 horsepower. Only 22 would be made over 5 years, mostly due to its high price and low demand. In 1932, they would move into the commercial truck market with the Fuso B46 bus, creating Mitsubishi Heavy Industries in 1934, soon expanding into diesel engines and bigger Fuso trucks, primarily for the war effort, as was their ship and aircraft production. Post-war production began with the 1.5 horsepower, 112cc Silver Pigeon scooter, helping to jump-start the post-war transportation boom in Japan. It was followed by the Mitsubishi. Similar to an auto rickshaw, it was a three-wheeled motorcycle-based cargo carrier, the first of many such vehicles. But Mitsubishi was soon broken up into 3 regional entities by Allied forces to reduce their political influence and control. Starting in 1951, they would start assembling knockdown kits of the Kaiser Henry J for the Japanese market, and did so for 3 years. Then in 1953, they would begin building Jeeps under license as the Mitsubishi J3, with variants soon to follow, continuing to produce them for 45 years. They would start making their own passenger cars in 1960, starting with the 500. It was 124 inches long on an 81-inch wheelbase, weighing 1,100 pounds. It was initially powered by a 500cc twin with 20 horsepower, soon gaining a 25 horsepower 600cc Super Deluxe version, which was stretched to 133 inches in 1962 to become the Colt 600. Around the same time, they would enter the K-car market with the Minica 360, initially offered as a wagon and pickup, and soon a sedan. It was 175 inches long on a 78-inch wheelbase and 1,100 pounds, using a 2-stroke twin with roughly 15 horsepower. A larger Colt 1000 model arrived in 1963, effectively making Colt a Mitsubishi sub-brand. The new car was 150 inches long on a 90-inch wheelbase and 1,900 pounds, powered by an inline-4 producing 50 horsepower. For 1964, the regional entities were reintegrated into Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and the Debonair Executive Sedan was introduced, 164 inches long on a 106-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,900 pounds, and powered by an 104 horsepower 2-liter straight 6, a car that would only see minor updates until 1986. For 1966, the 360 truck would be replaced by the cab-over minicab, although it continued to share much of its drivetrain with the Minica. It was soon followed by the Delica, or delivery car, also called a Colt in some markets, initially on an 83-inch wheelbase, using a 1.1-liter. In 1969, they introduced the Galant, or Colt Galant, a car that was 161 inches long on a 95-inch wheelbase, initially with a 1.3 or 1.5-liter engine with 87 to 95 horsepower, soon to become a bit of a sub-brand as well, starting with the Galant GTO, with sportier styling and an 110 to 125 horsepower 1.6-liter, followed by the Galant FTO in 1971, effectively replacing the Colt Fastback, 148 inches long and a 91-inch wheelbase, using a 1.4-liter. In 1971, a partnership was created to increase exports, with Chrysler taking 15% ownership in the company, creating the Mitsubishi Motors division, and bringing the Galant to the U.S. as the Dodge Colt, helping push total production over 250,000. But the Colt as a model was disappearing to be replaced by the Lancer in 1973, 156 to 162 inches long on a 92-inch wheelbase, weighing 1,700 to 2,000 pounds, initially with 1.2, 1.4, or 1.6-liter engines, with roughly 70 to 100 gross horsepower. It would come to the U.S. the next year as the new Dodge and Plymouth Colt, with an 83 net horsepower rated 1.6-liter. In 1975, the Galant FTO was replaced by a sportier hatchback version of the Lancer called the Celeste, soon gaining a bigger 2-liter, hitting North American markets as the Dodge and Plymouth Arrow, or Fire Arrow when it gained an 105 horsepower 2.6-liter. Then the Galant GTO was replaced by the Galant Lambda, 178 inches long on a 99-inch wheelbase and 2,300 to 2,400 pounds. Available with 1.6, 1.8, or 2-liter, available with a turbo, and 2.6-liter engines, and later a 2.3-liter turbo diesel. It would come to the U.S. a few years later as the Dodge Challenger and Plymouth Sapporo, and the standard Galant would become the Galant Sigma, 169 to 175 inches long on a 99-inch wheelbase, and 2,100 to 2,800 pounds, offered in 1.6, 1.9, and 2-liter versions. By 1977, Mitsubishi was setting up Colt dealerships across Europe, and the Galant Sigma was being sold as a Chrysler in Australia, pushing sales beyond 500,000. For 1978, there was a new front-wheel drive subcompact Mirage, initially 149 to 155 inches long, on a 91 or 94-inch wheelbase, weighing 1,700 to 2,000 pounds, offered with a 1.2, 1.4, or 1.6-liter engine, becoming the new Dodge Colt and Plymouth Champ in the U.S. And they moved into the compact pickup market with the L200, or Forte, also offered in 1.6, 2, and 2.6-liter, or 2.3-liter diesel, depending on the market. And they would come to the U.S. as the Dodge D50 and Plymouth Arrow pickup. But by this point, their American partners were not doing so well. So Mitsubishi would take over Chrysler operations in Australia and start marketing products in the U.S. under their own name. In 1982, the 30-year-old Jeep wagon was replaced by the new Pajero, called the Montero or Dodge Raider in the U.S., initially as a 157-inch long 2-door on a 93-inch wheelbase, but a longer 4-door, 183-inch long version was soon offered on a 106-inch wheelbase. Also new was the Tredia, fitting between the Lancer and Galant, 169 inches long on a 96-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,100 to 2,400 pounds, initially with a 1.4 or 1.6-liter with an available turbo. And there was an upmarket Cordia, roughly the same size, but with bigger 1.8 and 2-liter engines, and available electronic instrumentation. About the same time, the pickup became the Mighty Max, at least in some markets, with nothing more than a facelift. 1983 saw the introduction of the Starion to compete as a grand touring car. It was 174 inches long, also on a 96-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,800 pounds. Offered with a 2-liter with an optional turbo, or later a 2.6-liter turbo, with 109 to 173 horsepower, for a low 15-second quarter mile and speeds over 135 miles an hour. It would also show up at Dodge and Chrysler dealers as the Conquest. At the same time, there would be a new MPV, or tall station wagon, called the Chariot. It was 169 to 171 inches long on a 103 or 104-inch wheelbase, and available with all-wheel drive. Engines were 1.6, 1.8, and 2 liters, with a 1.8-liter turbo or turbo diesel. It would come to the U.S. as the Colt Vista. In 1985, Mitsubishi introduced the Magna to replace the Sigma in the Australian market. Still a variation of the Galant, it was initially 180 inches long on a 100-inch wheelbase, using the 2.6-liter, while the U.S. got a version of the Korean Hyundai Excel as the Mitsubishi Precise, as a workaround for import quotas. The Debonair was redesigned for the first time after more than 20 years of little change for 1986, initially 186 inches long on a 108-inch wheelbase. It introduced Mitsubishi's first V6 engines in 2 and 3-liter form, with the 2-liter soon getting an available supercharger for 148 horsepower, which was the same output as the 3-liter. The second-generation pickup would take on the name Strata or Titan, depending on the market, and was still sold as the Dodge Ram D50. Right about the time a joint Chrysler-Mitsubishi factory, Diamond Star Motors, was opened in the U.S., helping bump Mitsubishi's U.S. sales from just over 65,000 to roughly 240,000 in just a few years. They would also start producing vehicles in China. Chrysler would increase their stake in the company to 20%, and global sales would reach 1.5 million by decade's end. They would get a number of new models in the early 90s, including another upmarket model as the Diamante, 190 to 192 inches long on a 107-inch wheelbase, with a 2.5, or 3-liter V6. Then there was the Topo MPV, starting out as a tall Minica, 128 inches long on an 89-inch wheelbase, with a 660cc inline 3 for 40 to 50 horsepower. More significant was the new Eclipse, a sporty coupe that was 173 inches long on a 97-inch wheelbase and 2,500 to 3,100 pounds, with available all-wheel drive. Engines were 1.8 and 2 liters, with an optional turbo, for 92 to 195 horsepower, with a GSR being capable of a low 15-second quarter mile and speeds over 140 miles an hour. The smaller engine versions were not sold in the U.S., but variations of the Eclipse were sold here as both the Plymouth Laser and Eagle Talon. And a step up from that was the new GTO, or 3000 GT outside of Japan, 181 inches long and a 97-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,100 to 4,100 pounds. Also with available all-wheel drive, four-wheel steering, active aero, and adaptive suspension. The 3-liter V6 came in base 164 horsepower, or up to 300 horsepower in twin-turbo form, for a quarter mile just over 14 seconds, and a top speed of nearly 165 miles an hour. Finally leading to the Evo, or Lancer Evolution, a performance version of their compact car inspired by rally racing. A small four-door sedan that was 170 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,700 to 2,800 pounds, with all-wheel drive and using a 2-liter dual overhead cam turbo with 247 horsepower, giving it a top speed of 135 miles an hour and a high 13-second quarter mile. It was followed by the revival of the FTO for 1994 as a full-fledged sports car, 170 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,400 to 2,600 pounds, using a 1.8-liter 4 or 2-liter V6, ranging from 123 to 197 horsepower, for a mid-15-second quarter mile and a top speed near 145. Next would be a string of SUVs, getting themselves a step ahead of the other Japanese manufacturers, with such vehicles as the Pajero Mini, a K car that was 130 inches long on an 87-inch wheelbase, weighing 1,700 to 2,100 pounds. It used the 660cc engine in normal and turbocharged forms for 50 to 62 horsepower. It was followed by the Pajero Junior, comparatively larger at 138 inches long, on the same wheelbase and 2,200 pounds, with a 1.1-liter for nearly 80 horsepower. It was about this time that Chrysler decided to divest its stake in Mitsubishi and Diamond Star Motors. Europe would get the Charisma for 1995, based on the Volvo S40. It was 176 inches long on a 100-inch wheelbase and 2,400 to 2,600 pounds, initially using Mitsubishi's own 1.6 and 1.8-liter engines for 89 to 114 horsepower. Then 1996 would see the Pajero Sport, essentially just a wagon version of the pickup, 182 inches long on a 107-inch wheelbase and 4,100 to 4,200 pounds. And most markets got a base 2.4-liter inline 4 and an optional 3-liter V6, but other engines were offered from various 4s and diesels to V6s up to 3.5 liters. There would be more small MPVs for 1998, from the shortened Mirage-based Dingo that was 153 inches long on a 96-inch wheelbase and 2,600 pounds, initially with a 94 horsepower 1.5-liter engine, to the bigger Space Star, 159 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase, offered with 1.3, 1.6, and 1.8-liter engines for 80 to 121 horsepower. And some of these engines would find their way into the smaller Dingo MPV. In 1999, the Town Box microvan was introduced, essentially a passenger-focused version of the minicab Bravo van. The Debonair was replaced by the Proudia or Dignity, designed by Mitsubishi but built by Hyundai, who also sold it as the Equus, 210 inches long on 121-inch wheelbase and weighing 4,200 pounds, and powered by a 4.5-liter V8, producing 276 horsepower. It was about this time that Mitsubishi would peak in sales. But 2000 would see the end of both the GTO and FTO, leaving the new Eclipse as the sporty coupe model, although it was more image than performance by this time. But profits were down and would soon get worse, with the product recall scandal and allegations that the company was covering up defects. The AirTrek crossover was introduced in 2001, arriving in other markets a few years later as the Outlander. It was 174 to 179 inches long on a 103-inch wheelbase and 3,500 to 3,800 pounds, powered by a 2 or 2.4 liter with available turbo for 125 to 235 horsepower. It would be followed by the EK, or Excellent Kaiji Dosha, that would soon also be sold as the Nissan Audi. As such, it used a 660cc inline 3 with an optional turbo. It was 134 inches long on a 92-inch wheelbase and 1,700 to 2,000 pounds. The Colt returned in 2003, sharing its platform with the Smart for 4, making it 152 to 154 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase. Offered in engine sizes of 1.1-liter inline 3, 1.3 or 1.5 liter with available turbo, or 1.6 liter 4, or with a 1.5 liter Mercedes turbo diesel. In 2005, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries participated in a financial rescue of Mitsubishi Motors, giving them enough money to develop the IK car, 134 inches long on a 100-inch wheelbase, weighing under 2,000 pounds. And the company soon returned to profitability, with global sales back to 1.5 million. In 2009, they would release an electric version of the i as the iMEV, and less profitable models would start to disappear, starting with the Minica, and soon followed by the Eclipse and Galant. For 2012, there would be a revived Proudia and Dignity, now based on Nissans, the Fuga and Sima, or Infiniti Q70. The Lancer Evolution would be killed off mid-decade, and Nissan would purchase a 34% stake in the company, pulling it fully into the Nissan-Renault alliance. Soon, they would be expanding their light truck lineup again, starting with the Expander MPV in 2017, 176 inches long on a 109-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,900 to 2,800 pounds. It could be had with a 1.5-liter or as a 1.6-liter hybrid. It was followed in 2018 by the Eclipse Cross compact crossover, initially 173 inches long on a 105-inch wheelbase and 4,200 pounds, offered in 2-liter, 1.5-liter turbo, 2.2-liter turbo diesel, and 2.4-liter hybrid, with horsepower ranging from 128 to 161. The AirTrek name would be revived in 2021 for a fully electric SUV. So far just offered in China, 182 inches long on a 111-inch wheelbase and 4,200 pounds, with an 135 kilowatt or 181 horsepower motor. Next would be the X-Force crossover, 173 inches long on a 104-inch wheelbase and 2,700 pounds. And like the Expander it shared its platform with, it used a 1.5-liter or 1.6-liter hybrid system. In 2023, Renault started showing up in various markets as Mitsubishis, including the Clio as the new Colt. These days, Mitsubishi sales are led by the Outlander SUV and Triton pickup, using Renault and Nissan platforms, which might explain why sales are once again in decline. So as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.